Okay. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm just like a little bit, I guess social media tired. Let me get a TikTok started. Just give me a minute. I'm trying to set up the TikTok people. And I'll tell you why I'm taking the time to do this now, like this. Okay, I see how this works. Okay, so if you're able to go to TikTok, can you let me know if you can see um a board? Because I just created a board and I don't see it, so I'm not exactly sure how that works. So if you are expert at these TikTok things, just let me know. Okay. All right. I'm just thinking maybe just stop doing lives on TikTok for a quick minute. Um because it's just such a hassle. I got a notice on TikTok that I shouldn't be directing people to reach out to me. Okay. All right. So, um, it's just a lot of censorship. It's like a lot of things going on. All right. So my name is Dr. Tochi. For those of you who don't know me, Papa Dr. Tochi, Mama of the men's and the women's, and you know where to find me. That's all I can say at this point. There are just so many rules and things. Like they send this thing and they're like, stop referring people to go look for you and stop telling them to go, And I'm just like thinking to myself, okay, so you want me to show up on TikTok, create content on TikTok, and not provide people with a way to reach out. So if somebody wants to reach out, how am I supposed to do that? So they have this other thing they call Service Plus, and then if you have Service Plus, then it's supposed to let people know um that they can write you or it's just my thing is that it's just too much. That's just too much. Okay. It's just too much because I think these social like TikTok, they've gamified this thing so much that and like someone told me some months ago, rightfully so, that a lot of people who come on TikTok are not looking to get taught anything or they're not looking to get educated. They're actually coming to be entertained. And so I think about that and I say, okay, is that what I want to be doing? Do I want to be putting in extra effort into doing that? And so I think probably what I'm going to do with TikTok is just if I have a short video, because TikTok is really good for creating short videos and, with the filters and everything, just create the short video and then grab that short video and then use it for other purposes is just um, too much. um it's like you do this live thing and then oh you broke this rule and then you did this other thing, then oh do you realize you broke this rule, and then you have to they want you to be doing all these things and posting all these things and playing games. Like, remember those of you who were here last night, remember there was some Asian guy that came up on my TikTok and was like, okay, let's go, let's start the TikTok battle. And I'm like, you and who are you? Why am I doing this? I'm in the middle of trying to, you know, communicate my content, and so why am I here trying to engage in games with you on TikTok, you know? So it's not what I want to do. It's really not what I want to do. Okay, so um I have to figure out what I want to do with TikTok. If you know what, I think I'm just gonna stop the TikTok lives for now until I figure out how useful this thing is. Okay, because it's like each time I turn around, you can't do this and you can't do this and you can't say this and you can't say that, and it's not like I'm saying anything that is bad or I'm saying anything that is um unacceptable. Like, you can't even crack a joke. Like, I was trying to I don't know if some of you remember last year I was trying to crack a joke, and then I got banned for 1 week on TikTok just because I was trying to crack a joke, you know what I mean? Um, so it's just, like, too much. So, I think after today, I'm gonna put this, streaming live on TikTok, on hold. Just kinda leave that so I can focus on one platform. I used to stream. I used to stream live on what you call it, Instagram and Facebook. Um, I don't even know that people still go live on Facebook. It's been years since I watched anybody live on Facebook myself. And then Instagram, same thing too. It's been a very long while since I've seen any live streams on Instagram. So in terms of distributing content, I may just continue with Instagram and Facebook. If I, make a video on TikTok, like a short video on TikTok, I can just share it to Instagram. Because TikTok is owned by Meta anyway. And I think Meta has a share in it. Um, what's the parent company of Google? Is it Alphabet or something? Um, I think they also have a share in TikTok. So all these other folks have had their share now have their share in TikTok and now impose their rules on TikTok. So which is unfortunate. So anywho, y'all know where to find me if you need to find me. Worst case scenario, just Google Dr. Tochi. And you will find me. Okay. A book of woe says looking good is good business, but today you are natural. Well, thank you. I washed my hair today, so yeah, I washed my hair, so and it's gray outside. We were promised ice and snow. I haven't seen the ice and snow, but we were told it's going to go below freezing tonight. So just basically like, everybody's supposed to hunker in and stay indoors. So that's the deal with that. Okay. Um, we're going to be starting our retreat tonight. So I'm looking forward to meeting all of you who signed up for tonight's retreat. Remember, it's going to be going on for 7 days, and we're going to have a good time. Okay, close to 12 inches in New York. Yeah, we have nothing. It's just like bitterly cold. But for me, it's not even that cold. I mean, I can be out. Like I went out to check my exterior pipes to the house earlier, and I didn't go with a jacket. Now, I got cold after about, I want to say 50 minutes. I really started feeling the cold. But for most people in Texas, if they step out immediately, they're going to feel cold. But that's the advantage of having body fat sometimes. You have natural insulation. Before we start today's class, please join me in a moment of silence for those that are needlessly being escorted off this planet in the conflicts happening in America right now. May the souls, may the spirits of those who chose the path of moral right and defending the helpless and the defenseless, may they achieve profound peace with the ancestors. Ashe. I know that yesterday we talked about the cost of protest and the cost of getting involved with theories and conspiracy theories and conflicts and things like that. We also recognize that some people, that is their life destiny, that's what they have chosen, and that's what they have embraced. Everybody's life destiny is not the same. And there are many who choose that path of conflict in this lifetime so that others may benefit from it in this lifetime and in the next lifetimes. That is not to say that that path is devoid of pain and trauma, but we realize that everybody on this planet came here for different reasons. And on every continent right now, there is drama going on. On TikTok today, I saw several posts. People were posting and doing videos about how to do witchy things to influence what is going on. And there were folks posting on Hecate and other ancient European deities, invoking other, invoking ancient European deities. I found it interesting that None of the local, at least I haven't seen any video so far invoking the local deities of the Americas. I think at this point, people are just going to whatever it is that they're practicing. If people are into Orishas, they're invoking the African laws, the African Orishas, and some folks are invoking European gods and goddesses. And I find it interesting that I haven't yet seen a lot of, or even any video um, showing or pointing the way to reach out to the spirits of the Americas to start getting involved. Okay. Sometimes things like this have to happen for people to understand what good means. Because if not good doesn't happen, then folks don't necessarily know or appreciate what good is. So, as painful as it is, as dreadful as it is, everything, every event has its purpose. That's what I want to say. Okay. So, today's class, we're 20 minutes into it. So, for those of you who are watching the replay, you're going to be like, when is she going to get to the today's topic? I had to listen to her talk for 20 minutes about other things. Okay, so now we're going to get into today's class. Um about the Zisurrû, okay? And what Zisurrû is, what Zisurrû is, and what we can learn from that. Okay. So Zisurrû, okay, was literally a magic circle that was drawn on the floor with flour. And this was common in the Near East, not the Far East, but in the Near East, in ancient Mesopotamia. Okay. So we're talking about Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon. And these circles that were drawn on the floor with flour were meant as protective devices against ghosts, demons, curses, and any and all offensive spirit activity. That's why they would use flour. And we're going to go into a little bit more detail as to which flowers they used and why. And when I talk about flour, I am talking about grain flour, not the not the plant flour, not like the flowers you can pluck. I'm talking about flour, the ground flour, like a powder. Okay. As we go through this material, we come to understand that drawing protective circles is a very ancient practice. Okay. It's a very ancient practice. So when you have people today draw circles with salt, understand that these are ancient practices, that people are just using different materials to do the same thing. Remember to give the class a thumbs up or a heart. Remember to like and share to notify people we are in class. Okay. So, the idea behind the circle was to create a boundary. And the person who draws the circle is basically saying, here's what I want to happen outside the circle, and here's what I want to happen inside the circle. So that's why they draw those circles. Okay. And this was no different in ancient Mesopotamia. But in their case, they used flour, and they used different kinds of flour to draw these protective circles. And the reason why they used different flowers was because they had this belief that different kinds of flowers had different protective properties. Okay. So there was the shemush flower, it was like an ancient barley that was used. They used shemush flour, which is this ancient barley from ancient ground. They grind the barley. And this was used specifically against ghosts that caused mischief, or the ghosts that caused illness. Okay, so they use that to protect themselves from those kinds of ghosts, what they believe to be ghosts. Okay, wheat flour from wheat was used for invoking gods or friendly protective forces. So, the same way that we will go and make an offering and say, here, I'm inviting you into my space, they would use wheat flour to invite, not to keep out, but to invite. They also use shenuha barley flour around their beds for protection against illnesses, and they had beliefs in ancient Mesopotamia that demons carried diseases. That's what they believed. Okay. And we still find people who believe that today, that diseases are carried by demons. Okay. And that's a whole class in itself. I do have a class on spiritually transmitted demons and spiritually transmitted diseases. You can, watch the replay and, look up the video. All right. So, how were these rituals with these flower conducted? Okay. They would have an exorcist or priest come to the home, and this person would then draw a circle of flour around the ritual area, which was usually a bed or a shrine or an object. So if you had somebody who was sick, they would come there and use that flour and sprinkle it thick enough to form a circle around the person. Now, after doing that, they would recite a protection incantation like Sagba Sagba, okay, for protection against curses. And then they will say Tumu Bitu. That's another kind of incantation they would use. Obviously, I don't speak any Mesopotamian language, so I'm sure my pronunciation of these things is off. But the idea still remains. They will come there and do an incantation to protect against the evil, and do another incantation to set the intention and to set the spiritual work. Sometimes they will take idols and place those idols inside the circles to anchor the protective power that they invoked. And that to me speaks of egregore work. At the very least, it speaks of servitor work. All right. So this circle of flower, when you compare it to what we do today, it will do pretty much the same thing what a protective circle of salt would do. Okay. It was meant to keep demons out, evil spirits out. Okay. Now, what was the spiritual ecosystem of ancient Mesopotamia? What were those folks doing out there? Okay. Amongst the Mesopotamians, which included the Akkadians and the Babylonians and others, magic and religion and everyday life were not separated. They were intertwined. Okay. So magic for them was part of their religious practices and their worldview. It was accepted. There weren't people out there saying, "Oh yeah, no, this doesn't make sense." They used what they understood about how to manipulate and control forces to help them make sense of the world in which they found themselves. Okay. They believed that gods and demons lived amongst human beings. This is what they believed. And even today, we have a lot of people that still believe that we live with gods, goddesses, and demons. Okay. So these people strongly believed this, that just as you had human beings living, coming and going, you also had these gods and goddesses and demons coming and going amongst people. Matter of fact, there are some magical traditions that people practice today that are derived from those worldviews. So there are some people, for instance, who will tell you that they practice ancient Mesopotamian magic or ancient Babylonian magic or ancient Akkadian magic. You have people who this is their thing. And this is where this is the origins of what they're practicing. Okay. So they also believed in reading nature, that if they needed information, they could get information from nature. All they had to do was observe what was going on in nature. Okay. As far as they were concerned, religion was magic and magic was religion. It was so, in their religious view, magic was an accepted part of religion. Like nowadays we have it separated. For us now in the contemporary world, religion is faith in things not seen. We have no proof, we have no demonstration. We just believe that whatever it is will happen the way we hope it will happen. And then magicians on the other side doing things and showing results for what they do. But these ancient Mesopotamians did not separate religion and magic. If you were a religious leader, you were also expected to be a magician. And if you were a magician, you were also expected to be a religious leader, to be a priest. Okay. So you could not say, okay, I'm not religious and do magical things. You had to do the whole thing. So people will come to you not just for spiritual or religious direction, they will also come to you to perform magical acts. Oh, my horse is sick. come and, do what you need to do your incantations and rituals and stuff so that my horse can get better. Okay. My crops in the field are not doing well, or I need them to do better. I need you to come there and do some magic to make that happen. So back then, for you to be a successful priest, you had to be a good magician. You had to produce results. And in religion today, that's not a requirement. In our religions today, people say, have faith, have faith. God is going to make it happen. And there's no pressure on them to demonstrate anything. They're basically saying it depends on you. You have to believe it's going to happen and then it'll happen. But in these systems, the priests had to produce results. If they didn't produce results, nobody consulted them, nobody came to them, and they were considered frauds. So you see, the standard of performance for the Mesopotamians was rather high compared to, compared to what we have today. And that's why I think in you have like some evangelical and Pentecostal and charismatic religious folks try to show results for what they do. They're like, oh yeah, I was able to heal this blind person or raise the dead and so on and so on and so forth. Speaking of raising the dead, I don't know if some of you saw there was this video that was circulating a couple of years ago about some African pastor, I think was out in Kenya, somewhere out there, somewhere in East Africa. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. And or was it South Africa, the one who was claiming to raise the dead? Remember? And it turns out that it was all a setup. So he would set it up beforehand where somebody will pretend to be dead and they'll put some cotton balls in the person's nose, you know, and they'll say, oh, this person is dead. And they'll lay the person out in the coffin. And then at the appointed time, the pastor would come and do some abracadabra, and the person would get up from the coffin and look around like they were dazed. And then they will say, give me food to eat because I'm hungry. And then the congregation will be screaming hallelujah. And I think that whole setup got busted when I think the person who was supposed to have died was didn't get paid or something like that. They didn't get paid or um something happened. There was a disagreement, and they came out and they were like, look, I'm not, they told the pastor, they're like, look, I am not going to continue playing like I'm dead here because you haven't fulfilled your side of the bargain. And everybody was like, what? We thought this pastor was actually raising people from the dead. He wasn't raising nobody from the dead. Okay. So there are evangelical and Pentecostal and charismatic concerns that find it necessary to do these things to keep their followers as believers. Okay. But in ancient Mesopotamia, it was a given. If you could not demonstrate your magical skills, you were out. Okay. Now, there were different kinds of spiritual practitioners or religious practitioners in ancient Mesopotamia who would be the ones to make these protective wheat circles. Okay. These Zisurrû, they were Zisurrû experts. Okay. So you had the Ashipu. The Ashipu were ritual experts, and their expertise was in exorcisms, casting out demons from people. Okay. They were also highly regarded and highly educated scholars in ritual text and incantations. So, the same way today that you will have a well trained Ifa practitioner who will memorize the 256 um what are those things called again? Okay, descriptions. Okay, the 256 outcomes. I don't remember what the word is just escaping me. My brain is running on low today, so work with me. So I don't know my I don't know if I need a coffee. The Odu. Thank you. I just my brain's just running on low. Okay. So just like you have a well-trained, experienced Ifa practitioner who has memorized the 256 Odu, okay, is the way that these Ashipus would memorize magical incantations and the spiritual causes of misfortune. So so people will be sick, or animals will be sick, or the crops are not doing well, or somebody would have bad dreams, and they will send for one of their shipu, and the shipu will come there, diagnose what is going on, do a spiritual diagnosis, and may end up performing as Zisurrû. Okay. There were also general priests, Mesopotamian priests, okay, that were in charge of cult and temple rituals, and they made offerings to the gods and demons to appease them and protect the community from evil forces. Okay. Then you had some other practitioners whose sole focus was to read omens. And some of the omens they would read would be the sky. They would look at the sky and use the clouds in the sky or the condition of the sky to make a divination. Okay. And they would use that to make a divination for their community. So they were very skilled at that. They could look at the sky, look at what was happening in the sky, what lights they saw, what clouds, what interplay, and they will say, okay, I'm looking what's happening. Here's what's happening in the land. And they were accurate. Okay. So in these Mesopotamian cultures, they had people who this was their daily bread and butter. They were demon hunters, they were exorcists, they were ritual masters, they were diviners. Because again, remember their whole lives were tied up in these things. Before you got married, you go get a divination. Before you started a business venture, you get a divination. Before you made a trip, divination. Before you started a business, before if you had a child, you would do a divination to find out what gifts did this child show up with and what is this child here to do. Okay. So these ancient Mesopotamians believed in everything from Lamashtu. Lamashtu was considered a demon that was responsible for infant mortality, to Pazuzu. Pazuzu was a wind demon And Pazuzu, if you are familiar with baneful magic, you'll be familiar with Pazuzu. Okay. If you're into uh demonology, you'll be familiar with Pazuzu because Pazuzu is still used today. Is still invoked and evoked today. There are spiritual practitioners or even magical practitioners who still work with Pazuzu today. I got to know about Pazuzu, I want to say about 5, 6 years ago. And Pazuzu is not an easy daemon. Notice what I'm saying. Daemon. It's not an easy daemon to conjure up. Okay. You can't just run out into the streets or run out into your backyard and start screaming Pazuzu, 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 and, and Pazuzu will show up. Okay. And remember what I said earlier, there are people who are magical practitioners who are still working with these ancient deities today. They're still working with these ancient deities today. All right. Jason Carter says, very interesting. Sounds like my great grandmother in Samoa. She was a Taulo I too translated anchor of spirits. Very similar kind of practices. I stay away. Too ancient. I wouldn't recommend playing with ancient deities. And I agree with you, Jason. You see, people would lay their hands on a PDF of a grimoire, and like my advanced students know, we talk about this. If you have access to a grimoire, there is a certain um there are certain assumptions that are made by the writer of the grimoire. One of the assumptions made by the writer of the grimoire is that you know the rules of magical engagement. They assume. They're assuming you know how to put together an altar. They're assuming that you know what should be on that altar. They assume that you know the difference between a so called angel and a so called daemon. There are a whole bunch of assumptions that are made. And because those assumptions are made, they're not written explicitly in the grimoire. Let me give an example. Let us say that you got a copy of the Quran, and in the Quran, it's saying, here's how to live like a Muslim. Here is how you can be submitted, because the meaning of Islam is submission. There's an assumption that you are submitted, that you have recited and accepted the Shahada. It's assumed. It's assumed that you have submitted. It's assumed that you agree that there is no other God, no other Lord out there but Allah. Okay. So, for you to use the Quran successfully, these are certain assumptions that are made. But you will have some people who will go and grab a Quran start reading a surah here and there and coming to their own conclusions, or saying, okay, I have a copy of the Quran. I guess I can go forth and start doing some Islamic magic. So let's say you got an Arabian grimoire that talks about how to evoke jinns, maybe how to evoke a specific jinn for a specific purpose. The person who wrote that grimoire is assuming that you are already familiar with the Quran, that you know how to read Arabic, that you know how to correctly pronounce Arabic words. There's that assumption. But nowadays we go online and get something, and then we're like, oh, okay, I have the PDF of this thing, so I can do some pretty powerful things. And then we wonder why it didn't work. Some of you might remember, it has to be at least um 4 years ago, when we had this, was it a 3 hour class or 2 hour class on the sixth, seventh, and eighth books of Moses. It was a live stream, and you can go on my channel and watch the replay. Okay. Um, we had so much fun in that class because people were struggling to pronounce the words in the book. And there were important symbols placed with the words, and people didn't know what those symbols meant. They just thought, oh, okay, I guess it must be the design, some artistic design in the book. And they kept on reading and they didn't realize that those symbols placed strategically in the text required a certain action. So they were just reading through. They didn't know that it meant something. So now you might have that book, the sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th books of Moses. And if you don't have that background knowledge or background training, and you're like, oh yeah, well, let me do this conjuration, let me do this other thing with it. Oh, I wonder why it's not working. Or I wonder why I'm feeling some kind of way. It's because you don't know. It's because you don't know. Okay. So when we talk about Pazuzu, people today will use it against their enemies and also against their adverse conditions. Okay. But if you are to evoke an ancient entity like Pazuzu, there are specific ways it is done. And you will have a lot more luck in doing this successfully if you spoke a language that is at least close to the languages that were found in the Mesopotamian area. Okay. There are some calls, I'm not talking about a calling, call, that cannot be translated to English, French, Spanish, or any romantic language or any European language or any other language. They have to be said in the original language for them to be effective. Okay. So these Mesopotamian Ashipus were experts in this kind of thing. And they had schools and apprenticeships where they taught their inner circle how to work these things out. So that if they had to call Pazuzu, if they had to call Lamashtu, if they had to call any of these so-called daemons, those entities would respond. But you can go on YouTube today and you can look up Pazuzu on YouTube and you're going to see all kinds of things people are posting out there saying, oh, here's the way to do it, and here's the other way to do it, and here's not how to do it, and here's this, and here's that. And they don't know what they're talking about. People back then, despite Pazuzu being considered malefic, people would have amulets of Pazuzu. Okay, Jason Carter says exactly 100%. A could be a hard A or A sound. Mispronounced could be a whole different meaning in someone. Untranslatable. You're correct. And then you wonder why they don't respond or why they're responding in a weird way. Okay. So people would have amulets, Pazuzu amulets. Some to protect them from Pazuzu, and some amulets to place them under the protection of Pazuzu. Okay. And archaeologists have found several of these things, of these artifacts when they've been digging out in that area. So Zisurrû in action was often used around the beds of the sick to prevent ghost-induced illnesses. It was also used around houses or thresholds to block evil, to block harm from coming. And also, the Zisurrû was also part of larger ritual. The Zisurrû was also part of larger rituals like the Maklu ritual, which is considered a burning ritual. Okay. All right. Now, somebody might say, well, where is this Mesopotamia? Mesopotamia covers parts of Syria, Iran, and Iraq. Okay. So that's the area we're talking about. And that's considered, from where we are, is considered the Near East. So if you wanted to purify an area, to mark out a sacred space, to trap or repel malevolent spirits, or to safeguard the vulnerable people, the sick, the infants, the home, the elderly, you would use a Zisurrû, which again is that circle of flower. Okay. Now, I'm sure you're probably thinking to yourself, are there other parts of the world that had similar um, spiritual technologies? And the answer is yes, of course. You had different cultures in Africa that used circles, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. In Europe, using protective circles was also um, known. Okay. So they would have salt circles, chalk circles, even carving of circles. Okay. Now, thank you for the like, Nicole Kindred. In sub-Saharan Africa, um, you had ash circles, salt circles, and chalk circles, especially white chalk circles and red chalk circles. Okay. So I mentioned this so that you'll see that when you have a spiritual technology in one place, it is not uncommon or unusual to see a replication of that technology elsewhere, which has no connection to the other area. People in their religious and magical progression through trial and error figured out what worked and what didn't work. Okay. So Jason says Polynesia sea salt always and certain plants. Okay. Scorpio Intuitive says circles are important to the Cree indigenous people as well. We still find medicine wheels in old settlements in Canada. That's correct. And Scorpio Intuitive, you kind of kind of jumped forward here because I was going to talk about the Americas as well. So in indigenous systems, just like she said, they use sacred stone sand circles to mark off spirit safe zones. For instance, the Navajo would use sand paintings. Okay. Um, Others, the Inuit, they would have medicine wheels. And for those of you who don't know what a medicine wheel is, it's not like your tire or your bicycle wheel, is actually using stones, natural objects to mark off a circle on the land. Okay. You will also find protective circles in Haitian voodoo and you can find them as part of Vevez. Okay. And in Hay in Haiti, in Haiti, they would use cornmeal, white flour, ash, or other powders to invoke specific spirits or laws to come and participate in their ceremony. So you see, in Mesopotamia, remember we talked about the different flowers that they used for the Zisurrûs? So you'll find that also in Haiti. Okay. Lama of Tibet, chalk too for world blessings. Okay. If you go to West Africa, for instance, the white chalk, some of you have seen me use the white chalk. Okay. Um, a lot of West Africans in the coastal regions will use white chalk. Here is a sample of white chalk. I always like to have some white chalk with me. Here it is. Okay. And you powder it up. And when you powder it up, okay, you see you powder it up and then use that to make your circle. your protective geometry. Also in West Africa, not only did they have protective circles, they also have protective rectangles. And they also had other kinds of patterns they would draw on the ground with the white chalk or the red chalk or the red camwood, the yellow camwood with ashes. If you're looking at the Dogon, you're looking at the Ghana, you're a lot of those peoples that are closer to the Sahara Desert, they would use ashes, they would use special ashes, and those ashes were generated a certain way. And that's what they will use for their protective circles. Okay. In Europe, um, they had interlocking circles and daisy wheels. And again, these daisy wheels or interlocking circles will be scratched into the wood or scratched into the stone or scratched into the mud. And you could have it in the doorways and the rafters and the hearth to ward off. Again, the idea was to keep out evil spirits or bad witchcraft. Okay. In Celtic, Norse, and broader Western European folklore, you had fairy rings. So these were rings of mushrooms that were found in the forests, naturally growing mushrooms. And you could go in there for protection, go in there to do specific spiritual work. And those were considered areas that were sacred to spirits. Okay. A lot of the Plains tribes, coming back to the Native Americans, the tribes that the indigenous tribes that lived on the plains, okay, when they had those medicine wheels, they would arrange stones on the earth and they would have spokes in it pointing to the four cardinal directions. Okay. And a lot of spiritual work, especially spiritual alignment work and healing work, will be done inside these medicine circles. Okay. So we find out that these ideas of using a protective circle are proliferated throughout the world. Even if you go to certain um, mystical groups, they use the circle a lot for protection work. And it's understood that a circle represents protection. Okay. So, what questions do you have about today's material before we wrap it up? Thank you for the likes, Nicole Kindred. Just slop down this aloe vera. Okay. For those of you who are going to be attending the retreat today, I have not gotten any indication that we will not have power. So it is my intention to start the retreat on time today. Okay. We're under this winter storm watch. Um, They did tell us that the weather out here was going to be a lot worse than it actually is, and people should keep off the streets, and works out for me. There's not as much traffic as there usually would be at this time of the day. So we're going to go ahead and have that retreat. We're going to start this retreat tonight, okay? 11 p.m. CST. Make sure you show up on time because we will start on time and we will not go over material for late comers. You're welcome, Jason Carter. You're welcome. I'm curious as how you came to be knowledgeable on the subject. I research these things. Thank you very much. These are the things that interest me as a spiritual practitioner. Okay. When we learn about okay, okay, Scorpio intuitive. When we study ancient religious and spiritual traditions, it helps us make sense of some of the things that we are practicing today and why we do what we do. Okay. Nicole Kindred, can you teach me? I have a library of free YouTube videos. I'm not even sure it's safe for me to even mention YouTube and TikTok because they sent me a warning. Stop redirecting people to places outside of TikTok. So I can't even direct people. Yeah, yeah. You can just Google me. Just Google me, Dr. Tochi, spirituality. You will find me everywhere. Okay. So you will see people who make a big deal about, oh, I'm going to, do the circle around this tree, or I'm going to do the circle around myself, I'm going to do but they don't know the origins of that. Why a circle? Why a circle? Thank you, Scorpio Intuitive. She says her playlists are awesome in YT. I recommend that newcomers binge watch. Okay, so there you go, Nicole. A live recommendation there. Yeah, so people don't understand why circles are sacred. They just heard someone else say, "Oh, circles are sacred," or they heard on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or YouTube or somewhere. Oh, and oh, so we're forming a sacred drumming circle. We're going to dance in a circle, like Sweet Mommy, and they don't understand why. Why is the circle sacred? Where here's a little bit of mechanics for you, a little bit of mechanical physics for you. A circle, did you know that a circle, let me use this as an example. Mhm. Yeah. Did you know that a circle is stronger than a square or anything with edges? Okay. This, assuming that these two things were of the same material, if you squeeze this part with the same amount of force as this will collapse first before that. This is the reason why in some ancient architecture, I believe you had it in Roman architecture and Greek architecture, they perfected the art of the arched lintel. And they could build this lintel over a door in an arch form in such a way that mortar was not required to hold the blocks in place. Okay, Mrs. Allen says yes. Read the book Knights of the Round Table, Shakespeare. Okay, so if you look at a lot of that old architecture, and you will see this across Europe, they perfected this art of putting an arched lintel at the top of a door using different bricks and not requiring mortar to put, the mortar, the sticky stuff and the paste between the bricks to hold it in place. The tension amongst the bricks in that arc would hold it in place perfectly, regardless of whatever was going on. So, even from a mechanical perspective, circles are very strong. And so that's why your fuel tankers are round. They have a round cross section, they're in cylinders. That's why you have gas cylinders, they're round. Drums are round. That is the strongest cross sectional shape, a circle. So the ancients figured this out, that if I have to choose between something straight like this that I could break or a circle, I'll choose a circle. I could have a square, but the square has joints and it could get disjointed. I could have a triangle, it will get disjointed. Yeah, you're right. The sweet mommy says ancient infrastructures such as huts, cathedrals, etc., had circular features. That's right. If you go to some rural areas, they build in circles. Their huts are built in circles, and they're better able to withstand the weather, adverse weather, than rectangular structures. So circles in the physical sense are strong. And so we look at a law of similarities and we say, okay, if this thing is strong in the physical, we can assume that they're also strong in the spiritual. Okay. So people will draw circles. People will do their magic in circles. They will do their spiritual stuff in circles. And there are so many things, about circles. So, any questions about today's material? I have a whole bowl of I boiled because they talk so much about the loss of power. So I went ahead and if you look at this, I have a whole thing of eggs in here. I was like, I'm going to boil a whole bunch of eggs. You can't go wrong with eggs. With eggs, you can eat them hot or cold. Okay. So, and Kaga says, even the ancient huts in Saburu and Masai are circular. Yeah. People today assume that they know more than the ancient people. But as we do the research and we think about the things we find out that people in ancient times weren't exactly stupid. They knew a lot. They actually knew a lot. I hate it when the eggs, like you're trying to peel eggs and they'll do this. And I plunged, like, once I was done boiling the eggs, I plunged them immediately into cold water. But see, they're still like messing up like this. Oh, oh. Because I was told you if you plunge them immediately into ice water, they won't do this. Mine do. And there's like this whole thing out there about eggs, oh, maybe it means they're not fresh. Maybe they're this, maybe they're that. I'm just trying to get me some peeled, boiled eggs. That's all I'm trying to do here. Not to play a game of egg whites. So, any questions about today's material? I think it was really fascinating. Just even I know this wasn't an in-depth class per se, but just understanding how people in ancient times did what they did and possible connections to how we do what we do now. Okay. And there are lots of times we do what we do and we think, oh, I invented this thing. And you don't realize you didn't invent anything. Ancient people already did it way before you showed up here. Okay. This reminds me of the song from the Lion King movie called The Circle of Life. There you go. The circle can be considered an energy efficient shape. That's why the sun is round. That's why the earth is round. Okay. Is a very is the circle and the sphere are considered to be very stable shapes. They're stable. Okay. It's not easy to warp a circle. Okay. So, any questions about today's material? Any more insights? What do you think about today's material? What did you learn from it? How do you think that applies to your spiritual practices? Okay. People ask us why we build circular huts. You hit it on the nose, hurricanes. Yeah, it's very stable. So see things from the perspective of an ancient person. They're like, "Oh, okay. If I build this thing in a circular format, it's going to be very strong. So if I want to do something spiritual, I'm going to do it in a circle because I know from personal experience that circles are very strong." It's just the simplicity of the logic for me. They're not out there trying to invent any other thing. They're like, I've seen what works. Okay, think about it. Imagine if somebody tried to invent square or triangular wheels. You would find out that riding that bicycle would be very painful. Huh? Can you imagine square wheels? That would be very painful. Okay. So the circle is a very stable shape. I think does has anybody thought about why is it that these ancient Mesopotamians were doing their Zisurrû with flour instead of salt? What do you think? Why were they doing this with flour instead of salt? Nowadays we say, "Oh, salt is great for protective magic." So if salt was great for protection, why were they using flour instead of salt? What do you think? I want to see if anybody will figure this out. Salt melts? No. After all, flour blows away. Mhm. Flour bends? I'm not sure what you mean by that. I just hate this. Okay. Can you imagine? This is me trying to peel an egg. Look, I just hate this. It's like, now I have a good peeled one here. This one turned out okay, but this other one got messed up. Okay, flour binds, it melds. No. Why again? I mean, bang it over here because of the microphone. Come on now. Why do you think the Mesopotamians are using flour instead of salt? Okay, because salt can neutralize and also activate. No. It was a very practical reason, actually, why they were using flour instead of salt. A very practical reason. So if you know your ancient history, you should know the answer to that question. There was a practical reason why they used flour instead of salt. Anyone from TikTok know? To honor nature? No. Flour cheaper? No. Climate based answer? No. Come on now, where are our history buffs or people who know history? Why would they use flour instead of salt? We use salts today. Flour thickens? No. Thanks for the gift, Lushan. Thank you. No. It had nothing to do with the properties of the flour. Why do you think they used flour instead of salt? Come on now. Jason says it's of the earth. No, flour is also of the earth. It grows, they were grinding grains to get flour, so it is of the earth, so no. And like I said, it's a practical reason. Flower pollinates. We're not talking about flowers, we're talking about flour. I know it was more valuable than silver sometimes through history. Can you explain more what you mean by that? To provide necessary offerings. No. So, Jason, what do you mean by that? I know it was more valuable than silver sometimes through history. Okay, Jason's like, I love this. Why? What do you mean by that? Okay. TikTok folks, do you have an answer to the question? Why did the ancient Mesopotamians use flour instead of salt for their magical circles? Maybe to seal offerings? No. There was nothing about offerings here. We were talking about protection. This is protection magic. Because of food preservation. What has food preservation got to do with the magical circle? Wow. What has humans got to eat got to do with it? Knocking out my knuckles. Flour is a stabilizer. No. Who knows why they used flour instead of salt? Who knows why they used flour instead of salt? And I explained earlier, we're not talking about flowers, pretty flowers you can pluck off the plant. We're talking about flour powder that was ground and obtained from grains. Because flour derived from grains? No. Why were they using flour instead of salt? Today we use salt for our protection circles. So why didn't they use salt back in the day for protection circles? It's interesting to me how folks will go close to the answer and then they'll back away from the answer. Oh my goodness. Remember yesterday I asked a question and And I said, I know once I answer the question, someone's going to come back and say, yes, I was about to say that. I knew that. I was about to say that. So I'm giving you ample opportunity right now to get this right. Why did they use flour instead of salt? Flour was used as a barrier? No. Flour was used as a barrier, but it doesn't tell you why it was used instead of salt. Why was flour used instead of salt? That's the question, not what they did with the flour. You're saying flour was used as a barrier. Okay, Michi says because you can chalk it up. No. Thank you for the likes, I am culture. Because it was viewed as a gift from the gods. You guys are like slaying me here. No. Remember, I said it was for practical reason. Why did the ancient Mesopotamians use flour, which is ground grains? They ground the grains, and they would use that for their Zisurrû, their protection circles, instead of using salt. Why? Why would they do that? To feed and protect the ancestors. And are you like serious right now? What has ancestors got to do with the Zisurrû? Was there anything we discussed in today's class that had to do with ancestors? Okay, I am culture says access. I don't know what you mean by access. Why did the ancient Mesopotamians use flour, grain flour, instead of salt for their protection circles? Why did they use it for their Zisurus? To keep evil spirits at bay. You're still not answering the question. Why wheat instead of salt? Can salt not be used to keep evil spirits at bay? Do we not use salt today to keep evil spirits at bay? Okay, to build up energy and contain it. Oh my God. No, they had more flour than salt. Okay, it's possible they had more flour than salt. But why would they use flour instead of salt? What was the practical reason? They used flour instead of salt to invoke their spirit guides. Where are you guys getting these? We just did a class on Zisurrû, which are protective circles, and folks are here talking about building up energy, invoking the ancestors, invoking spirit guides. Is that what a Zisurrû is meant for? We said nothing about that. And culture says that's okay. I'm not sure what that means. Come on now. Where are my students of ancient history? You should know the answer to this question. what I said. You said access. I don't know what that means. You just put down one word saying access. I have no idea what that means. And I don't know how that answers the question. That's what I was saying. I don't know what that means. See, I have another mangled egg here. Oh my God, I can't believe that nobody knows why. And I've had a couple of people here come close to the answer, and I'm asking them to explain because I want to be sure that they know what they're saying and they're not guessing, and they backed away from their answers. Anybody? Somebody? Okay. I had a couple people that about three people that kind of were moving in the direction of the answer, then they backed away. Grace L says it was most accessible. What do you mean by it was most accessible? Why was flour most accessible in your answer, based on your answer? And Kaiga says flour is associated with making alcohol. What has that got to do with a protective circle? Why? The question again is why did the ancient Mesopotamians use flour instead of? Thank you. I have an answer. I am culture. Salt was too valuable. Thank you. There we go. Okay, Zuripenda says salt was rare at a premium. That's correct. That is correct. Congratulations. Salt was rare during those days. Salt was expensive. It was very expensive. There was a time in trading, salt was more expensive than gold. And so the average person, the average peasant, didn't have access to salt just like that. It's not like today we have 17,000 different kinds of salt. Back then, salt was reserved for the wealthy. Salt was reserved for those who lived by salty bodies of water. Not everybody had access to salt. There were a lot of African a lot of African empires that used to make a lot of money. Okay, and culture says is a root word for soldier. Okay. There were a lot of African empires in during those ancient days that made a lot of revenue from selling salt. And when they were transporting the salt, they would transport salt with armed men. They would transport the salt with warriors and soldiers because it was very expensive and very high demand. Only the rich and the powerful had access to salt. So so what okay, so now that we know why they were using flour instead of salt for their Zisurrûs, what does that teach you about spiritual practices? What does that teach you about spiritual practices? What insight does that give you about spiritual practices? Come on, this is an easy question. Okay. And culture says they can be flexible. Okay, that's correct. What else? What else? They can be flexible. That is correct. What else do you learn from this point about spiritual practices? That you can use what you got. Correct. Correct. Nietzsche M, you're correct. You got to use what you got. Okay. Zirapenda says use what you have. It has value. That's correct. So what this teaches us is that when people come, and I see this sometimes online when people are involved in arguments and they're saying, no, if you're not using exactly this one thing, your spirit guides will not respond. That's not true. If you don't use exactly this component, what you're doing will not work. That's not true. That's not true. It is because of use what you got that the slaves in the Americas started using white eggshells. I know this is brown, but they started using white eggshells to make cascara, cascaria, cascara. My brain is on slow today. Cascaria powder. It is because of that that the slaves started using eggshells, white eggshells, for cascaria. Cascaria, if you've watched the videos I put out on African white chalk, cascaria was supposed to be a replacement for the African white chalk. The African white chalk, remember I showed African white chalk? African white chalk, this comes from West Africa. A lot of slaves in the Americas came from West Africa, and they needed to duplicate this thing. So I was looking for my cascaria book. And so they had to become inventive. And so they would take white egg shells and grind the white eggshells into a fine powder. And then they used that powder in rituals the way they would have used white African chalk had they had access to white African chalk. And it works. It works. Yeah, it works. Okay. So, all right, folks, I'm going to peel some more eggs here and then put this away. I got left 3 more eggs to peel. Yay! I'm gonna peel these eggs and save them. I don't think we're going to have a power outage. I think one person was writing online that they talk about power outages in the South just to make people go buy things from the store. One person was saying that they went out and bought a brand new generator. And so they were ready with their new generator and everything. And they didn't take it out of the package. So if the storm didn't come, they were going to return it. They were going to return it. Oh my goodness. I still think that having a generator handy in the garage is still a good idea. I mean, I think it's a good idea. Did you learn anything from today's class? If you learned something, let's have your IAYE in the comment section. It says don't eat too much eggs, Dr. T. We got to get our protein in there. All right. Thank you. Enjoy my eggs and my winter chill, right? I'm actually going to take a nap. I'm going to take a nap. There's this um class that I'm going to be taking next month, how to put together retreats, wellness, spiritual retreats. And the young lady who's teaching the class has years of experience on putting together or helping people put together spiritual retreats and wellness retreats. So I'm going to learn how to do that. I think having face-to-face retreats is more powerful than having online retreats. I think I like face to face. Yeah, I like face to face stuff, and there's so many things you can do face to face that you can't do um online. And then when you're meeting face to face, there are a lot more things you can control than if you're just meeting online. You know what I mean? Because if you're online, you still have to answer to the other people in your environment. But if you have a face-to-face retreat, you just focus on where you are at the moment. So yeah, I'm looking forward to learning more about that. and how to do it in a professional manner, and how to do them in such a way that people really get value from attending those retreats in person. You know what I'm saying? Hey, all my eggs are peeled, so I can go rinse them off and put them in the fridge, and they're going to be ready. Oh, golly. Face to face, yeah, I kind of like face to face. And that's why when I was doing events in last year in Texas, I was saying to people, hey, if you can, come and meet us face to face for, the water rituals and things of that nature. Um, I don't know that I'm going to do that for this year. Last year, we had high hopes of meeting in South Africa, some of us coming together, meeting in South Africa, but there was just too many moving parts last year. There were just too many moving parts, and then with the immigration situation going on in the Americas, I didn't want a situation where somebody would say, "Oh, let's go with Dr. Tochi to a retreat in Johannesburg," and then they can't come back. It's just there were just too many moving parts. But I'm just like thinking, is there another way of going around that? Okay. And even if it's just for 3 days, just being away for 3 days in nature and not having to have pressure on anybody to do anything magical or have magical outcomes, just thing. Okay. Mrs. Allen says, I did one many years ago in Arizona, Sedona. Yeah. And they have a lot of those things out in Arizona, and you'll pay money for it. They're not inexpensive. But my understanding is that you will have a good time, but it's not inexpensive. Yeah. Okay. So remember again, to make money in 2026, make sure that you're making profit. All right. Remember that spiritual knowledge and wisdom without money is just motivational speaking. So if you don't want folks just looking at you like a motivational speaking, saying, "Oh my God, when is she gonna shut up?" or "When is he gonna shut up?" Make money. If you make money, people will listen to you. Even if you're talking nonsense, people will listen to you because people respect money. Okay. Remember yesterday I was talking about a group of us that put $150,000 together, to set up microfinance loans for some women in a developing country. There were some people in our group that stood up and weren't really saying anything, but the women were clapping and laughing enthusiastically. They were clapping and laughing enthusiastically. And I remember sitting back and I was just observing that. And it's not like the people who spoke were idiots or anything like that. No, they were not. But they weren't saying anything huge or anything profound. But because there was big money in the room, at least at the level of these women, big money in that room, they would agree with anything you said. They would support anything you said. Because in their country, $150,000 is a lot of money. Now, over here or in Europe, that may not be a lot of money, but to them in their country, it was a lot of money. Yeah, they were happy to be there. So even if you said, um, John is dancing with the cow, everybody will clap enthusiastically and they'll go, yay, 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 yay. So people will listen to you when you have money. People will listen to you when you have resources. And people will listen to you if you have the appearance of somebody who has resources. If you know how to play that game well, people will listen to you. Just something to keep in mind. We're thankful to our Creator, our guardian spirits, our ancestors, and our spirit guides for today's forbidden fruit. May it continue to yield fruit in our lives. Ashe, Isai, Kamaga, Takoza, Laseti, Upangoli. Ayababa, it is done, it is finished, it is complete. Amen, Ma'at. Thank you all for coming to class. TikTok. My days with TikTok, I don't know. TikTok, I'm finding TikTok a bit hard to use. It's just too much to do on TikTok. So I'm going to try my best with TikTok, but if I can't, and there's just too many, you can't do this and you can't do that, and you did this and you didn't do this and the other thing and whatnot, I'm just going to stop doing live streams on TikTok. It's just too much headache. All right. Love you all. And for the retreat folks, see you in a few hours. Thank you for coming.